He mocked her in German, believing she was too uneducated to understand a single word. Seconds later, she answered him fluently, and in that moment, everything he had built quietly began to fall apart. Before I go any further, if stories like this pull you in, take a second to subscribe to Untold Journey Stories. It helps more than you think, and it keeps stories like this alive. What stayed with me about this moment wasn't just the shock, it was the silence that followed. You know, that kind of silence, the one that doesn't just fill a room, it exposes it. Because up until that point, she was invisible, just another waitress, another name no one bothered to remember, another person they assumed didn't matter. And I'll be honest, that's the part that unsettled me the most. How easily people decide your worth based on what they think you don't know. Her name was Liana Brooks, and if you saw her that night, you wouldn't have thought anything unusual. Calm posture, steady hands, the kind of quiet presence people overlook without a second thought. But I've learned something the hard way. The quiet ones, they're usually the ones carrying the most. Because what that man didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that Liana understood every word, every insult, every assumption. She didn't interrupt, she didn't react. She waited, and that pause, that controlled silence, that's what changed everything. Because when she finally spoke, it wasn't just a response, it was a line being drawn, and what started as a moment of humiliation became the first crack in a story much bigger than anyone in that room was ready for. And trust me, this wasn't just about language, this was about power. And the moment it shifts, it never asks for permission. And that was the moment the room shifted, even if no one wanted to admit it, because when Liana spoke in flawless German, it didn't just surprise them, it exposed them. Every word they thought was hidden, every insult they thought was safe, was suddenly laid bare. And here's what I kept thinking about. Why didn't she react sooner? Why wait until that exact moment? Because that kind of restraint, it's not weakness, it's control. Liana didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself the way most people would. She did something far more unsettling. She translated them, line by line, calm, precise, unshakable. And you could feel it, the discomfort creeping in, the way their confidence started cracking under the weight of their own words. But the man at the center of it all, Daniel Hargrove, he didn't back down. Men like him rarely do. Instead, he smiled. That slow, dismissive kind of smile, the kind that says, "You're still beneath me, no matter what you know." And that's when things escalated, because he didn't just insult her anymore. He challenged her, questioned her place, her education, her right to even stand there. And for a brief second, it looked like the moment might collapse back into silence, like power would reassert itself, the way it always does. But then something changed. Not in the room, in her. You see, up until that point, this was just about disrespect. But what Daniel didn't realize, what no one in that room could have possibly understood, was that Liana wasn't just hearing insults. She was recognizing patterns, names, connections, fragments of a conversation that didn't belong in a restaurant, whispered like they would never matter. And suddenly, this wasn't small anymore. This wasn't personal. This was something bigger, something buried. And the way she looked at him after that, it wasn't anger. It was certainty. The kind that only comes when you realize you're not the one trapped in the room. They are. And what she chose to do next didn't just humiliate him. It started something none of them would be able to stop. And by the time the night was over, this wouldn't be a private moment anymore. It would become evidence. And when something buried for that long begins to surface, the people who hid it don't panic. They move. The meeting was arranged quietly. No witnesses, no noise. Just a private room, dim lighting, and the kind of controlled atmosphere where decisions are made without leaving fingerprints. I remember thinking, this wasn't a conversation, it was a test. Across from Ariana sat Julian Langston, not as loud as his father, not as openly cruel, but there was something colder in him, something measured, like every word had already been calculated before it was spoken. He didn't threaten her right away. He offered her something first, a way out. "If you walk away now," he said, almost gently, "everything becomes easier. Medical care for her grandmother, financial security, a future without struggle." It sounded reasonable. That's how power works. It doesn't always force you, it invites you to surrender. But then came the second option. And this is where his tone changed. If you don't, you won't just lose, you'll be rewritten. That line stayed with me because it wasn't about destroying her life. It was about controlling how her story would be told, turning truth into something ugly, making her look like the villain in her own fight. And then he said something that made everything feel personal. My father didn't regret business decisions, Julian admitted quietly. He regretted her. Ariana, you took something from me, he added, without even knowing it. That wasn't power speaking anymore. That was resentment. And in that moment, Ariana made a choice that honestly most people wouldn't. She didn't negotiate. She didn't hesitate. I'm not here for your money, she said. I'm here for the truth. The air changed instantly. Two men stepped forward. No words, just presence. And for the first time, you could feel the danger becoming real. But before it could go any further, the door burst open. Voices, commands, light flooding the room. And just like that, the silence they had protected for decades broke. And once that silence shattered, it didn't just expose corruption. It uncovered something far more personal. Because beneath all the documents, the recordings, the legal consequences, there was a question that had been waiting much longer than any investigation. What really happened to Ariana's mother? For years, she had lived with a version of the truth that felt complete enough to stop asking questions. An accident, a loss. Something tragic, but final. But final stories don't leave behind loose ends, and this one had too many. It started with fragments, old records that didn't quite align, dates that felt adjusted. Then a statement, quiet, almost reluctant, from someone inside the Langston family during questioning. She didn't die. That was it. 4 words that changed everything. Her name was Lillian Cole. And what happened to her wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Years ago, she had fallen into something that, on the surface, looked like love. But love, when it exists inside systems built on power and control, rarely stays pure. When she became pregnant, the terms changed. Offers were made, generous ones, enough to disappear quietly. She refused. Then came the pressure. Not loud, not public, but precise, targeted, not just toward her, but toward her child. And this is the part I keep coming back to, because I don't know how many people would have the strength to do what she did next. She walked away, not to escape, but to protect a new identity, a new country, France, a life built in the shadows of someone else's name. And years later, a letter surfaced, written in French, deliberate, careful. She's safe. Don't look for her. I used to think abandonment and love were opposites. Now I'm not so sure. Because sometimes the only way to protect someone is to become the person they believe you lost. And for Ariana, that realization didn't just hurt. It gave her direction. Because somewhere across an ocean, someone had been waiting. And what happened next felt less like an ending and more like something finally being returned. Because once the truth was out, it didn't just punish the powerful. It gave something back to the people who had been living without answers for far too long. Elena didn't sleep that night. Not really. She sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft beeping of machines that suddenly felt fragile, temporary, like time itself was on loan. And I remember thinking, this is the part no one talks about. The quiet after justice begins. The moment where the anger fades, and all that's left are questions you're not sure you're ready to hear the answers to. Because justice doesn't heal you instantly. Sometimes it just opens the door to deeper truths. And that door was about to swing wide open. The next morning, Elena stood in a small, dim office holding a photograph that didn't feel real. A woman, older now, silver in her hair, but the eyes unmistakable, her mother alive. For a long time, Elena didn't say anything. She just stared, like if she blinked, the image would disappear. And I found myself wondering something uncomfortable, something honest. What do you do when the person you've mourned your entire life suddenly exists again? Do you feel relief, or do you feel robbed? Because all those years, all those birthdays, all those empty chairs, they weren't fate. They were decisions. And that realization, it changes everything. But Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't sit there and analyze it the way most of us would. She chose something simpler. She chose to go, to find her. And maybe that's what makes her different. Not stronger, just clearer. Because sometimes the truth isn't about closure. It's about movement, about stepping forward, even when your past is still catching up to you. Days later, she stood in a small cafe in a foreign city, her heart beating so loudly it drowned out everything else. And then she saw her. Not a memory, not a ghost, a woman, waiting. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just for Elena, but for all of us watching her story unfold. Because this was never just about revenge. It was never just about exposing a powerful family. It was about something much quieter, much harder. The courage to face the people who left you, and the even harder courage to still choose love when they're standing right in front of you. When Elena finally stepped forward and her mother whispered her name, it didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel cinematic. It felt human, messy, overdue, and real. And maybe that's why this story stays with you, because in the end, power didn't win, money didn't win, control didn't win. What won was something far less visible. A grandmother who never stopped believing, a daughter who refused to stop searching, and a mother who never stopped waiting. And as I sat there, thinking about everything this story had taken and everything it had given back, I realized something I don't think we say enough. Sometimes the most powerful language in the world isn't spoken, it's felt. And if you've ever lost something or someone and wondered if the truth would ever find its way back to you, maybe this is your reminder. Sometimes it does, just not in the way you expect. Then let me be honest with you. The ending you just heard? It's not the full weight of what really happened, because justice, real justice, doesn't just heal. It settles accounts. And in this story, every single debt was paid. Slowly, publicly, irreversibly. Maxwell Whitmore didn't just lose a case, he lost control. The empire he spent decades building didn't collapse in flames. It unraveled, piece by piece, in front of the world he once commanded. Bank accounts frozen, board members resigning overnight, partners turning into witnesses. And the most brutal part? No one defended him. Because power, built on silence, dies the moment truth becomes louder. His brother tried to negotiate, tried to trade secrets for freedom, but by then, it was too late. The machine they created to crush others had finally turned on them. And Elena, she didn't celebrate. That's the part people expect and get wrong. She didn't stand there smiling at their downfall. She stood there, watching, quiet, still. Because when you've spent your whole life being underestimated, justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like balance, like something finally clicking back into place. And this is where I need you to really think with me. Because what Elena did wasn't just brave, it was dangerous. She chose truth, knowing it could destroy her. She walked straight into a system designed to erase people like her and refuse to disappear. That's not luck. That's power, not the kind you inherit. The kind you build in silence over years until one day it becomes undeniable. And in the end, the most devastating punishment for men like Maxwell wasn't prison. It was exposure. The world saw exactly who he was. And worse, they stopped being afraid of him. That's the moment power dies, not when you lose money, but when people stop believing in your illusion. She didn't just reclaim her story. She rewrote the rules of it. From a waitress they dismissed, to the woman who dismantled everything they thought was untouchable. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to answer honestly. If you had the chance to expose the truth, but it meant risking everything you have, would you do it? Or would you stay silent and survive? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, because these choices, they define who we really are. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories where power doesn't win, where truth fights back, subscribe to Untold Journey Stories, because the next story might hit even closer than this one did.